I'm Pauline Verzosa.
I'm Shawn Yao.
And standing in for Ces Oreña-Drilon, I'm Zaldy Co. The big stories tonight, Zaldy Co now seeking political asylum in France. That's according to Malacanang, which earlier said the former congressman was detained in the Czech Republic. But that turns out to be negative.
And tomorrow, the House Justice Committee resumes impeachment proceedings against Vice President Sara Duterte. And by the end of the day, the panel may know if there is probable cause to push the case closer to trial.
And another bad day for the Philippine peso as it reaches the 61 mark against the US dollar. This is the local currency's worst close in history so far.
The DFA has received highly reliable information that Zaldy Co has a pending petition for political asylum in France.
Parang big blow setback na naman kapag nawala yung inaasahan natin.
I doubt it, not if they are really sincere in finding Zaldy Co. Kasi it will expose a lot of powerful people in the government.
The much-taunted arrest and Philippine return of Zaldy Co are no more, at least for now. The Justice Department confirms what skeptics have been saying all along. The former lawmaker is still on the run. But it seems there's a new chapter in this cat and mouse. Co is reportedly seeking political asylum in France. This is tonight's big story.
The latest word on fugitive Zaldy Co. He is now trying to seek political asylum in France. This is according to Palace Press Officer Claire Castro, who revealed the information in a briefing on Wednesday, hours after the Justice Department announced that the former lawmaker is no longer under custody in the Czech Republic.
The DFA has received highly reliable information that Zaldy Co has a pending petition for political asylum in France. He has been requested to be transferred to and is now under the jurisdiction of French authorities.
Co is said to be invoking political persecution as basis for his asylum application.
Pero alam natin na bago pa man nangyari ang lahat, siya ay hinahabol na at pinababalik dito para sagutin ang mga alegasyon. Wala pong masasabing political persecution dito. Maliwanag po yan.
Again, this update follows Acting Justice Secretary Frederick Vida ending the Prague chapter of the hunt for the former chairman of the powerful House Appropriations Committee.
I have to share difficult news, mga kababayan. Czech authorities have informed us that Mr. Zaldy Co is no longer in their custody.
What's worse, Vida seemed to have been stonewalled by Czech authorities on the details of Co's detention and subsequent release.
We asked for that reason. They reiterated that he is no longer within the territory of the Czech Republic. We also asked that when they did release, they said they can no longer furnish additional information. They're taking a position. I hope you understand that we should respect that. Okay.
Vida and a team flew to the Czech Republic last Friday based on the information that Co was still in Czech custody. This was the last update the DOJ received last week until the confirmation of the fugitive ex-congressman's release on Tuesday night.
The exact information, he is no longer within the territory of the Czech Republic. He is not detained.
Vida, however, did get information that Co was carrying an expired passport which lapsed on September 11, 2022, when he was accosted by Czech authorities. The acting justice chief added that Co had 3 passports, an official passport issued during his term as congressman, a current one already canceled by the Sandigan Bayan, and the other that expired 4 years ago. These documents, according to the Department of Foreign Affairs, have been reported to the Interpol for further action. But as an asylum seeker, Co is currently free to roam around Schengen member countries which are not implementing tight border inspections. Zaldy Co is reportedly traveling by land, accompanied by his son and driver. For now, Secretary Vida remains confident that the government can eventually bring Co back to the Philippines, where he is facing allegations of involvement in the flood control scandal and irregular insertions in the national budget.
Mataas ang kumpiyansa, 99%. Let's look at this. Sabi nga nila, hindi naman binibilang yung nadadapa ka eh. Ang mahalaga yung pagbangon at may natutunan tayo. Na-delay lang tayo.
But President Bongbong Marcos is disappointed with how things went south for Zaldy Co's long-awaited return to the country. Yusek Castro also again defended the chief executive from those blaming him for the blunder.
Saan po siya dapat mag-apologize? Lahat naman po tayo ay umasa. Lahat naman po na dapat gawin ay ginawa ng Pangulo at ng administrasyon. ang kanyang inireport naman po ay tama. Wala po tayong nakikita na maaaring sabihing pagkakamali ng Pangulo.
President Marcos has likewise called for the French ambassador and the Czech diplomatic officer to discuss Co's case and see where the hunt for Zaldy Co went wrong.
Ang mga kababayan naman natin.
Meantime, lawmakers are pointing out the missed chance to arrest and bring home Zaldy Co. Senate President pro tempore Panfilo Lacson called it an embarrassment to the government. Lacson said the Marcos administration failed to act with dispatch even after having been timely informed about Co's apprehension by Czech authorities. It was a lost opportunity, Lacson said, something that government only has itself to blame. Other lawmakers have likewise expressed disappointment over Co slipping away. Senator J.V. Ejercito highlighted the importance of bringing the fugitive ex-lawmaker back to the Philippines.
Parang big blow setback na naman kapag nawala yung inaasahan natin.
Ito, back to zero na naman tayo, sir, kay Zaldy Co.
Siguro kasi hindi rin yun ang sabi ng DOJ kanina, no, na bad news, no, sad news na nawala na sa custody ng Czech Republic. So of course we would want him to be here so that we can already find out what he knows, kung ano yung participation, sino yung mga kasama.
But for Congressman Ega Erice, Zaldy Co's escape is not a missed opportunity.
I doubt it that if they are really sincere in finding Zaldy Co. Kasi it will expose a lot of powerful people in the government. Nakita naman natin yung sinasabi ni Congressman Zaldy Co. Pero kung sabi ko, kung gusto malaman, patawag lang si Yusek Bersamin, patawag si Yusek Cadiz, patawag si E.S. Bersamin, malalaman na natin na si Secretary Pangandaman, malalaman na natin kung ano nangyari.
And now in other news, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, has constituted a trial chamber that will hear the crimes against humanity case of former President Rodrigo Duterte. Trial Chamber 3 will be composed of Judges Joanna Corner, Kibong Peik, and Nicholas Guiu. Corner has specialized in criminal law for 45 years and was a judge of the Crown Court of England and Wales before joining the ICC in 2021. She rendered her most high-profile decision just months ago when she chaired the ICC trial chamber that sentenced militia leader Ali Kushaib to 20 years in prison for war crimes. Paik, meanwhile, was a public prosecutor for South Korea, rising through the ranks at the Ministry of Justice. There, he drafted the bill for South Korea's ratification of the Rome Statute. Guiu, on the other hand, was a pre-trial judge at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers for 4 years, which issued the arrest warrant for Kosovo Liberation Army commander Salih Mustafa. Mustafa was later convicted for war crimes. ICC Assistant to Counsel Cristina Conti hailed the constitution of the trial chamber, saying that the next steps will be generally administrative, involving cooperation among the prosecution, the defense, and the legal teams of alleged victims of the Duterte drug war. Conti added that a status hearing in private session could be scheduled soon. Now, for his part, Common Legal Representative for Victims, Attorney Gilbert Andres, assured clients they will be kept in a secure place. The victims' identities will not be divulged during the trial, although the defense team will be given the chance to cross-examine them. Andres sees the trial beginning as early as October this year.
As far as the public is concerned, dahil po sa maselang na seguridad ng mga witnesses, naka-code po sila. Hindi lang po pangalan ang lumalabas, code po ang lumalabas. At kaya nga po merong 30-minute delay sa web streaming po ng ICC kasi yung delay po yan para i-redact kung ano man pong mga masiselang detalye po ng witness pong yon. Pwede din pong naka-blur ang kanyang itsura po at yung boses niya po ay iniiba kung sa web streaming po. Ngunit sa loob po ng courtroom sa ICC, alam po yan mga abogado ng parties at ng victims, participants po.
We discuss our big stories with our first guest tonight, international law expert Attorney Romel Bagares. Sir, magandang hapon. Magandang gabi. Welcome back to the big story.
Magandang gabi po sa ating pong nanonood at sa inyong tatlo.
Sir, question on everybody's mind. Of course, our basis for this question is the Philippine experience. Pero, di ba, if Zaldy Co was arrested for not having travel documents or papers, kasi nga cancelled ang passport niya, why was he released by Czech authorities instead of being detained and or deported back to home country like what would usually happen in the Philippines? Of course, again, a reference here is the Philippines.
Well, we can have an informed guess because he's now, according to reports, in France, right? And I would guess, based on that development, that France is actually his first country of entry into the European system. Yes, and we have Dublin 3 regulations stating that if you're going to apply for an asylum, if you're going to file a petition for asylum, you need to do that in your country of first entry. That is why he was sent to France. So the Czech Republic did not anymore wait for that process because otherwise it would probably be delayed by another 2 to 3 months. So he was just sent back to France. That's our guess right now.
Yes, sir. But at any rate, do you think that an application for asylum in France, that trumps all the other possible aspects of this case, which would include the lack of travel papers?
Not necessarily, it's definitely going to delay things from the Philippine perspective because the European system is really strict with respect to rules and asylum. They have human rights norms to follow, and you have the principle of non-refoulement, the right not to be returned to your place of origin if you stand to be in danger of threats to your life or be subject to persecution. That's always a consideration for the European asylum and refugee system. So there's definitely going to be a delay from the perspective of the Philippines.
Would you know, Attorney Bagares, or any anecdotal perhaps examples of how they would consider, political persecution if the asylum seeker makes his case? Would they really hear him out and really dig deep into the context of what's going on in another country?
We have an example of Jose Maria Sison, no? Took many years, in fact, even after denial of his application for asylum, there was the appeals process that also took many years. So his denial of his application was rendered 5 years after application. Then another 5 years of the appeals process did see through the finish line because he died while the whole process was pending. So that's one example for us, right? That's why I think it's important for the Philippine government to actually put together a strong case under the relevant conventions to show to the European authorities and especially to the French authorities that this is not really, political persecution, but prosecution, especially for corruption and money laundering, because we do have relevant treaties for that, which would factor in French consideration of the asylum petition by Mr. Zaldy Co.
Because, as you mentioned, Attorney, Zaldy Co is facing criminal charges here in the Philippines. But by him being tagged as a fugitive already from justice, will that possibly hurt his application and his credibility? Or by being a former lawmaker, can he automatically connect this to political persecution?
Well, as I said, this is really urgent for the Philippine government. There is already a proceeding in the Philippines. There was a freeze of his assets, and in the European system, they're quite keen with respect to financial crimes. And the European system, many of the European states are parties to two conventions, to which the Philippines is also a party. That's the Convention Against Corruption and Convention Against Organized Transnational Crimes. And for these two related treaties, money laundering is really one of the anchors that the Philippines may use. I have always been wondering because the news about the freeze of assets of Mr. Co happened 2 or 3 months ago. So I would expect that by now the Anti-Money Laundering Council would have put together a strong brief, a case for the European authorities to issue what is known as an European arrest warrant for the request for cooperation, especially with respect to a case for money laundering with a European nexus.
It's interesting, sir, that you brought up a case of Joma Season. 5 years pala ang kanyang bago mapagdesisyonan at ma-reject yung kanyang asylum application. And then a long appeal period na kung saan inabutan pa yung kanyang pagkamatay. So for all intents and purposes, baka umabot ng taon din to, itong kay Zaldy Co?
That was, of course, the Dutch system, and this is the French system, and there's separate office for that, an office for refugees and asylum seekers. The best case you can make is probably 2.5 years at least, for a process of this nature. And if it is denied, there's a court specific to asylum petitions in France, where you go to for an appeal if your petition for an asylum is denied. So it's going to drag on, actually. That is why it's important for Philippine authorities to have already had put together, a strong case, because the European system is quite strong when it comes to financial crimes that involve organized systems of criminality. And in the flood control scam, it's not just one person, but it's a network, allegedly, right, of DPWH officials and legislators who profited from public infrastructure projects. And that, by any measure, is definitely organized. So that would have fallen under the relevant provisions of the UN Convention on Organized Transnational Crime.
Did I hear you right? Sorry, follow up. Did I hear you right? 2.5 years at the fastest? That's what we're looking at with the French system?
Yeah, that's an optimistic assessment of things. A few years ago, actually, I was actually a guest of the French government, and one of the things that I observed was this system of asylum petitions, because I visited a house of journalists who were persecuted in their home countries, and they were asylum seekers. So I have some familiarity with the rules in France, and that is why the Philippines should really move faster. Should have actually moved faster early on when they filed the freeze cases, the forfeiture cases against Mr. Zaldy Co. They should have also framed it as a case for money laundering, so that they can file a mutual legal assistance with European authorities for the issuance of a European arrest warrant.
Okay, I wanted to ask, speaking of moving faster, Attorney Bagares, had the government moved faster and went to the Czech Republic, not wait for a week after they got wind na nahuli si Zaldy Co doon, would it have made a difference knowing now what European laws are and how they are?
I'm very sure that there are a lot of experts in government. The MLC, they have people there who studied the relevant legal regimes, right? We should not be talking of 2 weeks ago or yesterday or last week, but 3 or 4 months ago. So this is really quite a long delay on the part of government. So we don't know really what's the reason for that. But I think that this tells us that government really needs to catch up. Because there really are legal mechanisms available. As I said, we are parties to these two conventions, the UN Convention Against Corruption and UN Convention Against Organized Transnational Crimes, and there are mechanisms there for mutual legal assistance with respect to money laundering and organized transnational crimes.
Okay, and now we've moved on to France, where the Czech Republic is already moved. What would you like to see the government be doing right now or yesterday?
Well, I would have expected by now there's already a money laundering case against Mr. Zaldy Co and a request for mutual legal assistance under these two relevant treaties. So I don't know where we are right now, but these are remedies that are, I would imagine, well known to the experts in government, because you have the DOJ has an office for international relations, the AMLC is peopled with experts on financial regulations and financial crimes and mutual legal assistance for that matter. And then we also have the DFA, of course. And these three agencies need to cooperate closely so that they can move faster to bring Mr. Zaldy Co home.
Well, Philippine authorities say they already filed this application for an Interpol red notice way back last year. Attorney, would you know why it would take this long before one is issued against Zaldy Co? And if one isn't issued yet, does that mean this asylum application will take precedence and Zaldy Co is free to travel in the Schengen states?
Well, he has no. If we got the news correctly, his passport will be canceled. But apparently, from the news we saw, he has 3 passports, right? But if you have an asylum petition, normally you would not be able to travel freely because you're now have to be stuck in the place where you applied for an asylum. So after you file an asylum petition, you will not be able to move around like you would want to.
Mm-hmm. Sir, balayan ko lang yung red notice. I understand kasi, at least if I recall it correctly, I think we applied for a red notice last quarter of last year.
Like
September, October, thereabouts.
there.
It's already going into May. We're already entering the second quarter of the year. So in other words, we've seen 2 quarters pass since the red notice was applied for by the Philippine government. And I think as late as 3 weeks ago, John Vic Rimulya was saying that they just submitted or they just finished submitting requirements for the red notice application. So I'm wondering lang if we're taking too long with submitting everything for the red notice or if we're...
Are we getting a sense? Ako na lang.
sige
You're
po.
too nice. If you're getting a sense that it could have been a lot faster than 6 months.
Well, you're correct, given the public clamor for it, right? And of course, the red notice is just one avenue, as I was saying. There's the European arrest warrant that would have been faster. That would have been anchored on a money laundering case. Because the Europeans are, they're very, very queasy about that. When they get wine of cases where corruption money actually entered the European system, the European arrest warrant would have been the ideal recourse for that. It would have been faster because that would be easily disseminated under a separate obligatory regime for that within the European system outside of Interpol.
Well, actually, it's the first time we've heard about the European arrest warrant, at least as far as I'm concerned. So can you tell us about that more? A European arrest warrant, what makes it different from an Interpol red notice and the strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, because that would have been specific to financial crimes. As I said, the government has to make a case that this involves money laundering. There is a European nexus because, Mr. Ko has been traveling abroad, and the government has to make a case that corrupt money entered the European system, some assets from the Philippines, proceeds from crimes committed, organized crime, corruption under these 2 conventions that I was saying. These could have been the anchor for a request for the issuance of an European arrest warrant.
For example, we heard that Zaldy Co has properties in Portugal and as well
exactly.
in France.
Yes, and the government could have made a case that these are proceeds of financial crimes committed in the Philippines. As I was saying, the flood control scam allegedly involved not just one person but many, including DPWH officials and members of the legislature. So that's organized by any definition, and that would have fallen within the scope of the UN Convention on Transnational Organized Crime.
Okay, so just to drill it home, hindi kasama kasi there's only 3 cases filed against him now. It's malversation of public funds through falsification of public documents, Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act violations, and violation on graft. So are those not enough to qualify under financial crimes?
Well, there has to be a specific, I suppose, an ancillary proceeding for money laundering. Because you need to state that there is a European nexus, meaning that there's a connection to Europe, and that connection usually would be tacked onto property assets that then the government may frame as proceeds of the crimes committed in the Philippines.
So, Attorney, won't the asylum application of Zaldy Co still take precedence, or will the government also have to prove that this is not in any way political persecution?
Well, it's parallel, right? It will run because there is a process for that. But the government is not forestalled, not prevented from interposing an objection to that process and saying that, that asylum petition is really meant to evade criminal responsibility under Philippine law.
Attorney, I'm taking a shot here, but do you think our authorities are aware of this European arrest warrant and the implications of having used it or not used it? Kasi I haven't heard it brought up at all in the last so many months that we've been talking about Zaldy Co being abroad.
I'm very sure that the government knows about that because we have many experts in government. The AMNC, for instance, they're required trainings for that for their personnel. We have many government officials, lawyers who have undergone graduate studies in corporate law. That would include proceedings like what we're talking about. So I'm sure that people would be familiar with that. Plus, not to mention, we have the DFA with its own set of experts.
Okay, and speaking of the DFA, of course, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Attorney, I think we have a better and more deep, longer relationship with France as compared to the Czech Republic, because they're actually relatively a recent republic. How can we leverage that closeness with France? Is there any way, that can come into play?
Well, as I said, it's not really just a relationship, although that's important because we have to convince the French officials that this is not persecution. Plus, because they have an embassy here, they would know. Normally, there would be attachés, there would be embassy people who are tasked with filing reports about what's happening in the Philippines, right? So there would be diplomatic intelligence within the French embassy that will gather the relevant information they would need for inputs that would go into the French government's response to the asylum petition. So that should not be difficult, I think, for the government, to make a case before the French authorities that Mr. Co has to be sent back to the Philippines.
And Attorney, if we may move on to a different topic now, still on the international front, the ICC has already constituted the trial chamber for the crimes against humanity case that the former president, Rodrigo Duterte, is facing. Tell us what's next between now and the trial proper?
Well, this whole thing will now go to trial preparations. And there's going to be a new set of procedures with respect to disclosures because remember we had disclosures. There's a requirement with the principle of equality of arms that both the defense and the prosecution, they have to show all the relevant the evidence they have, including those that tend to exculpate the accused from the alleged crimes. So there's going to be a new set of that because now this is going to be a full-blown trial. Before you only had a review of the evidence that the prosecution intended to use for purposes of confirmation charges. So there's that new round again of procedures, and we can maybe even expect the defense to object to any of the judges and say this judge is biased or something like that. No, and then you can have further delays with respect to that. But this is really the next few months will be spent on preparation for the trial.
Okay. Well, we'd like to say thank you to Attorney Romel Bagares for joining us tonight and for his insights. Maraming salamat, sir.
This is the big story on One News. Still ahead is the Duterte impeachment hearing resuming tomorrow with the House Justice panel possibly voting if the complaints against the Vice President are ripe for plenary discussion. We have details next. Keep it here.
Welcome back to the big story. Tomorrow, April 29, the House Justice Committee could vote on whether or not to refer VP Sara Duterte's impeachment to plenary.
Here's a run-through of what might happen. Before voting on probable cause, the panel will discuss the alleged threats made by the VP against President Marcos, his wife Liza, and his cousin, the former Speaker, Martin Romualdez. The National Bureau of Investigation, which is on top of that case, has been summoned by the House. Recall that NBI Director Melvin Matibag had said they've uncovered evidence that Duterte actually planned and not just spoke or, in her words, joked about the kill plot. After this, the Justice Committee will likewise decide if it will open the so-called green box containing the ITRs or income tax returns of the Vice President and her husband, Attorney Man Scarpio. In the previous House hearing, the Bureau of Internal Revenue said that these records could be opened in aid of legislation and only in an executive session.
Now, after the supposed kill plot discussion and verdict on the green box, the Justice Panel may proceed to vote on probable cause. If majority says yes, the committee will meet again on May 4 to tackle approval of the committee report. That, plus the articles of impeachment, will be put together for transmittal to plenary. By May 11, the whole House of Representatives is expected to vote whether or not to impeach the Vice President a second time. VP Sara was first impeached on February 5, 2025. But the case was archived at the Senate following a Supreme Court decision declaring the complaint unconstitutional. But this time around, some lawmakers believe the ouster move versus Duterte will make it to the impeachment court.
I will vote for probable cause. I'm quite certain a lot of members of the Justice Committee will vote for probable cause tomorrow. Hindi ho yan smoking gun. Nuclear bomb ho yun. Kasi 6.7 billion in total transactions, 4.4 billion in inflows, pumasok na pera sa mga bangko po ng mag-asawa, 1.5 billion na lumabas po sa bangko ng mag-asawa.
Matibay na yung batayan. Buti at nagkaroon nga ng Committee on Justice hearing dahil nasiwala talaga sa publiko na mayroon talagang basis. No? Winaldas talaga yung confidential funds. Pinapabalik nga ng COA. Tapos malinaw na-confirm na yung mga undeclared bank accounts. No? Malinaw, wala yun sa SALN. Nilulusot ngayon na nasa others daw, pero ang layo naman ng amount. So, bilyones versus 88 million. Diba? Mukhang may maleta rin ang Vice Presidente na kailangan niyang ipaliwanag. At yan nga, kaya kailangan ma-impeach na para magkaroon na ng trial sa Senado.
Meantime, Justice Committee Chairperson Jelby Luistro does not see the complaint of Attorney Mans Carpio affecting the outcome of their investigations. That's if the Supreme Court does not issue a TRO on the impeachment proceedings. Yesterday, Carpio filed criminal complaints against the BSP governor, AMLAC, and several lawmakers for divulging his financial information in the House hearings. Carpio says this is a violation of the Bank Secrecy Law and the Data Privacy Act, among others.
Far as we are concerned, we maintain that everything that happened and will happen before the Justice Committee are constitutional. It has been our stand that this is a constitutional duty. This is not a matter of choice. This is a matter of duty to the Constitution and to the sovereign Filipino people.
Meantime, a former president of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, or the IBP, believes that the VP's continued absence in impeachment hearings could do her more harm than good. That statement came from Attorney Domingo Igon Cayosa, who joins us tonight. Attorney Cayosa, thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Magandang gabi sa ating mga kababayan.
Attorney, we had a back and forth yesterday with the lawyer of Attorney Mans Carpio, and he was insisting na hindi pwede, it's confidential daw. Absolutely confidential yung bank records, even if we cite RA 1405, if I remember right, the Bank Secrecy Law, which also includes a proviso that exempts the impeachment proceedings from the confidentiality rule. What do you think po? Is it clear in all the statutes of the Philippines na pwedeng pag-usapan ang mga bagay-bagay nito?
Well, the Bank Secrecy Law is very clear that in case of impeachment proceedings, pwedeng pabuksan yan, pwedeng tignan ng Kongreso or ng impeachment court. And more importantly, Ed, they're using the wrong law because what was revealed was the report of the AMLAC, not the bank deposits of the couple or the vice president or members of the family of the Duterte family. What was summoned were the records of the AMLAC, and it is incumbent upon the officials of AMLAC to report to Congress and to obey the subpoena. As a matter of fact, the AMLAC law, Section 14 of the AMLAC law, makes it criminal for any public official or employee who is called to testify and refuses to do the same on purpose or purposely fails to testify shall suffer the same penalty as person making a malicious AMLAC report.
Well, I think just to clarify, Attorney, he was saying that there are exemptions to the Bank Secrecy Law but not to the AMLAC law. because that's supposed to be as, I don't know, like just completely closed off. But he was also pointing out, of course, that his client is Attorney Manasseh Scarpio and not the vice president. So we're also a bit iffy on the whole conjugal thing. Like, should they have also exposed his personal bank accounts, not just their joint accounts, and of course the VP's own accounts?
But because the AMLAC law requires all banks to report transactions more than 500,000 and above, 500,000 and above, and also suspicious transactions. So all banks report that to the central bank through the AMLAC, the Anti-Money Laundering Council. So that's required of everyone. Now, the records of the AMLAC, those reports are public records. And when the AMLAC is summoned by any court, or in this case, Congress, which has a very clear subpoena powers, they cannot refuse to honor that subpoena. As a matter of fact, it's clear also in Section 9 of the AMLAC law that no administrative, criminal, or civil proceeding shall lie against any person for having made a covert transaction report in the regular performance of his duties and in good faith, whether or not such reporting results in any criminal prosecution under the AMLAC law or any other Philippine laws. So ang linaw ng batas. So hindi mo sila pwedeng kasuhan for making that report and obeying a lawfully issued subpoena. It is very clear in the Constitution that Congress has subpoena powers.
Oh, pero kasi po, isa pa niyang punto is that hindi naman daw impeachable official si Attorney Mans Scarpio.
But, you know, the report of AMLAC applies to everybody, regardless of whether you're a public official or a private official, or whether you're an impeachable official or not. So, yung kahit private ka, you're covered. So, when the report is material and relevant to an ongoing investigation, and there's a validly issued subpoena, it is the duty of the AMLAC Executive Director and AMLAC as a whole to render that report. Because AMLAC really, the anti-money laundering law and this technique of flagging up big transactions in the bank deposits and withdrawals, they're meant to discourage corruption, plunder, graft and corruption, transnational crimes, terrorist financing, and many other similar crimes. So now if you criminalize the act of making that report, how can the purpose of the law be achieved? You are blocking the very means by which the purpose of the law can be achieved.
But is it the right forum? I mean, it is the impeachment of the vice president and not a case filed against Attorney Manasseh Scarpio. Or is it because it's a related thing or they're married? Does that automatically mean that can be disclosed there in the House?
But that's the nature of money laundering. When ill-gotten wealth or illegally acquired monies are made to appear to be clean money by depositing and withdrawing it in seemingly innocent accounts. So that's the whole thing. So you don't distinguish between the husband and the wife or a private citizen or a government official. When they're all involved in it, then, and there is a valid subpoena, then they have to respond to that. Remember, the two impeachment complaints mention graft and corruption as one of the many grounds for impeachment. So yung graft and corruption are predicate crimes for money laundering. So it is very relevant and material. And you cannot block it by, filing cases against the central bank governor, the commissioner of insurance commissioner, and the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the executive director of AMLAC. They're just doing their job.
But at this stage of the impeachment proceedings, attorney, can the House Justice Committee be considered as a competent court that can issue subpoenas? Because the concern there is, this is just the clarificatory stage, hindi pa po impeachment court ang House of Representatives. That will happen in the Senate. So baka medyo gray area kung may power po ba talaga sila to issue subpoenas like this for documents that are absolutely confidential and disclose pa po ito in public.
Well, let me correct you on that. The AMLAC report is not absolutely confidential. It's meant to be reported out if there are investigations regarding anti-money laundering. And as I said earlier, graft and corruption, plunder are predicate crimes for money laundering. So, speaking of power to issue subpoena, the power of Congress, in my mind, to issue subpoena is even based on a higher law than the power of any court to issue subpoenas. Because the power of Congress to investigate and to conduct these kinds of hearings when there are impeachment charges is in the Constitution. So you cannot limit a constitutional power by a misguided application of the law, the prohibition. As a matter of fact, it is not absolutely confidential. They're meant to be reported out if there are investigations, because that's the function of all of this data.
Sir, if you look at the transaction amounts that were revealed last week dun sa Justice Committee hearing, it does appear clear na yung years na 2007 until 2012 or 2013, yung mga years kung saan malaki ang pumasok na pera o gumalaw na pera doon sa bank accounts ni VP Sara. You're looking at 700 million in one year, 600 million another year, 500, 400, 300 million in succeeding years and so on down the line. But those were times when she was the vice mayor and then subsequently the mayor of Davao City. But if you look at the years of 2022 until 2026, mas malilit na po yung mga gumalaw na pera in those accounts. 4 million in one year, 1 million in another year. And these were the times when she was already the vice president. I'm wondering, sir, how the timelines could affect how the case would develop. Kasi if a connection is trying to be made that hindi tumutugma yung sala ni Sara Duterte doon sa kanyang bank account transactions, mas bumabagay po yun doon sa panahon na siya vice mayor at hindi vice president.
Well, it doesn't matter. For them to, for example, money laundering, you have to establish a trend and a regularity and similarity of transactions. Kasi ganun naman yung money laundering eh. Pasok, labas, pasok, labas. So but it cannot be just one transaction. You have to cite a series of transactions. That's why it is relevant to look at transactions even before she became vice president. Now, let's look at the years when she became vice president. Still, there were substantial amounts. Still, there were what they call suspicious transactions.
Covered transactions, yes, sir.
Covered transactions kasi yung 500,000 and above. So yung suspicious transactions, meron. And more importantly, it looks like these were not reflected in the salary of the vice president when she was vice president. So she has to do a lot of explaining. Of course, it is correct that at this point, these are just presumptions or indications of offense or criminal offense or violation of the law or violation of the anti-money laundering law, graft or corruption, plunder, or violation of the Zaldy law. But unless the vice president can refute all of these data, official records coming from an agency of government that has the duty and the authority to keep these records, it will work against her.
Okay, can we move on to the green box, guys? So tomorrow, we're going to find out whether that green box, which contains the ITRs of the Vice President and Attorney Manasseh Carpio, last week, we all know that the BIR Commissioner refused to open it right away. He said kailangan daw executive session and in aid of legislation. But I also read a report earlier today that actually Attorney Carpio had filed a TRO, na-reject siya ng court, but of course that still can be appealed. How are these factors going to interplay on the question kung pwede ba talagang buksan yung green box?
Well, it should not affect the decision of the Committee on Justice. They have the sole prerogative to conduct the investigation with respect to these impeachment complaints. That power is in the Constitution, not in ordinary law. So it is for them. Pag-aaralan nila, because if you listen very closely to what the BIR commissioner was saying, he was only citing Section 270. But if you read that section, it really pertains to officials and employees of BIR. The prohibition is about directed against BIR officials and employees. They failed to consider Section 271 of the NIRC. It says that ITRs shall constitute public records and shall be open to inspection as such upon the order of the President. So pwede naman yun. They just have to go through that process of asking the President to allow or order them to submit those documents. So meron ding mas bagong batas, yung January 2024 Ease of Paying Taxes Law. So nakalagay doon na yung ITR, the processing of this, which is ITRs, is included as a covered report. The processing of this shall be in accordance with the data privacy law and other laws on disclosure of information to the public in adherence to the principles of transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality. So hindi ho absolute, hindi ho limited lang yung exception. Ang mas importante dito, tignan natin yung mas bagong batas that says pwede ito under the Data Privacy Act as long as it confirms and confers with the principles of transparency, legitimate purpose, and proportionality.
So, Attorney, are you saying that the House Justice Committee can actually go ahead and open the box as early as tomorrow, or would it be more prudent for them to wait for the Senate as an impeachment court to do this?
Well, they can. To my mind, they can. There's enough provision under the cited laws, including the Data Privacy Act, which considers tax returns as confidential and personal information. But even the Data Privacy Act allows the disclosure of that. So they can, to my mind. But if they want to be very careful, para naman hindi ulit makatakbo sa Supreme Court or any other court, and they will again stop the impeachment process, gawin na lang nila sa Senado yun. Pwede naman nila gawin yun.
Sir, Pablo na lang. Of course, in the end, it comes down to a vote. But also in the end, you're looking for probable cause. Kayo po, bilang isang abogado, do you see probable cause?
Definitely. Kasi ho yung probable cause, mababa lang yung threshold of evidence. It's just enough evidence to convince a reasonable mind that a crime has been committed and the respondent probably did the crime. Ganun lang ho committed. You know, there's more than enough official records, COA audit report, PSA, Philippine Statistics Authority, yung sa SALN na dinabas ng Ombudsman, yung AMLAC. These are not personal statements. These are official documents, official reports of government institutions, agencies that are tasked to handle these kinds of information and records.
Okay, maraming salamat. Former IBP President and constitutional expert, Attorney Egon Cayosa. Thank you, sir.
You're still watching The Big Story on One News. Still to come. The local currency plunges to another record low today, breaching the 61 mark. That story and more when we return. Stay tuned.
The big story is back with news on the Philippine peso hitting another historic low. The pesos breached the 61 per dollar level, closing today at 61.30 against the greenback. Tuesday's close surpasses the record set on March 31, when the local unit settled at 60.748 against the greenback. The peso has slumped since the Gulf War broke out on February 28 as investors run toward a safe haven dollar. The local unit has settled beyond the 60 per dollar level 11 times, 5 of which occurred this April. Besides a firmed-up dollar, the peso's weakness can also be attributed to weak foreign investor confidence. Japet Tantiangco of Philstocks Financial says investors are headed to the exits as rising inflation expectations dim the country's economic outlook. The PSEI is now on a 5-day losing streak, closing today lower by nearly 0.6%. The Philippines imports all of its oil, making it one of the most vulnerable countries during this energy crisis.
And here are other stories making headlines on this Tuesday. So-called king of contractors, Curly Descaya, is scheduled to undergo surgery on his right shoulder, after which he will be confined for 1 week. Senate Secretary Mark Leandro Mendoza, though, says he is still waiting for clearance for the operation. Curly stepped out of Senate premises in March to undergo MRI after complaining of pain on his shoulder. He has been in Senate detention since September of last year after being cited in contempt. Curly, along with his jailed wife Sara Descaya, are being tagged in the flood control scandal.
Meantime, House Deputy Speaker Janet Garin says if she had it her way, Cavite Congressman Kiko Barzaga should be expelled from Congress. The House Committee on Ethics and Privileges met this Tuesday to hear the complaints against the twice-suspended Barzaga, who has snubbed the hearing. Garin is one of the complainants after Barzaga linked the death of an Iloilo vice mayor to her. The Deputy Speaker asserts that the self-professed Kong Miao has not changed despite all the complaints against him.
And in another development, the Pasig City government has ordered the closure of Blue Hotel, operated by Zerin Development Corporation, following an NBI raid there on April 21st. The establishment is accused of engaging in human trafficking and prostitution. It has been linked to former lawmaker Mike Defensor, who has since denied any connection to the hotel and its operations. And a survey by Octa Research shows Vice President Sara Duterte leading a hypothetical one-on-one presidential race against Naga City Mayor Leni Robredo. Duterte got 46% support versus Robredo's 35%. The poll also found 19% of respondents undecided, indicating the race could still tighten despite the current VP's lead. Octa said the narrower margin compared to previous surveys suggests a more competitive and polarized electoral contest heading into 2028.
And finally, for our big picture tonight, it's all systems go for the MPTC Tour of Luzon 2026, which officially starts tomorrow, Wednesday, April 29. The 14-stage cycling event, dubbed a Heritage in Motion, will bring together top local riders and international teams for a grueling race across northern Luzon. Competitors will start in Calatagan, Batangas and end in Baguio City. Tonight, 13 teams made up of 91 riders joined the opening ceremony, graced by Philippine Sports Commission Chairperson Patrick Gregorio, MPTC Tour of Luzon Chief Organizer and CEO Ari Perez, and board members including MediaQuest President and CEO Ricky Vargas. And the race will run from April 29 to May 13.
It's gonna take 2 weeks from Calatagan to Baguio.
Ako, sobrang init niyan. I hope they will be fine.
Hydrate. Well, that goes for everybody.
That
it's
goes
so
for
hot.
everybody. It was so today the heat index reached 45 degrees Celsius. That was in Bicol. So those are considered danger levels already.
You feel it?
No. Lamig sa studio. We're just joking.
All right, and that will do it for us here on The Big Story this Tuesday. Thank you so much for watching.
We are back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. We'll see you then.
Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time. Good night.